Actually, State Street has been phenomenal in terms of their investment in modernization and embracing the innovation and emerging technologies out in the market. We're introducing agentic platforms to help us, accelerate and to do more in terms of our modernization, our tech debt reduction. And that's where I really like what, for example, our partnership with Blitzy and their approach. Here's, 30 million line code base, actually providing context iteratively through agents that work together and do iterative recursion on that over and over again so that you can bring in all of that context. And out the other end, you get something that is buildable, which is quite impressive. We are unlocking by adding this additional capabilities and additional assurance that improves quality exponentially more than we could have in the past.
Welcome to CIO Classified. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios, and today I'm joined by three guests. First, my amazing co-host, Yusuf. How are you?
I'm very good and always pleased to be here as your self-appointed, unglorified, unpaid intern. So thanks for having me again. What's happening?
It's the unpaid part that really is the best.
It's the most fulfilling, please.
That's right. And then we have Jason with State Street Alpha. Jason, how are you?
I'm doing well, Ian. Yusuf, nice to meet you both.
Awesome. And then we have Sid with Blitzy. Sid, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so excited. What a group. Well, let's get to it. So Jason, first, tell us sort of like the remit of State Street Alpha, Charles River Development, and your role there right now.
Sure, absolutely. And I'll try to keep it as high level and short for the audience here because the financial services industry is quite a behemoth. So State Street Alpha is a one-office solutions and technology for the financial services market. We serve the largest asset managers, asset owners, sovereign funds, pension funds across the globe. Specifically, Charles River Development was an acquisition of State Street in 2018. Charles River has a long 30-plus year tenure starting in the 80s as a preeminent front office trading platform. So all of your order management, order execution, trade execution, compliance rules. You're expanding now into front office and middle office and even into enterprise-wide data. So the remit is very large. Specifically, my role as CTO is to drive the engineering functions, quality engineering functions, as well as the compliance functions for things like certifications across the business. So I've got about 800 engineers reporting into my organization, and we are the engine room per se of the products that we bring to the market across dozens of products and about $60 trillion worth of assets on the platform today across all major regions of the globe.
It's a big number.
It is a very big
I think that might be the record for the biggest number ever on the show. I don't think anyone has said 60 trillion before. And obviously a lot of complexity, a lot of different product offerings, like you mentioned, different platforms. So yeah, I guess just talk to me about sort of like the complexity of managing that much stuff as CTO.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think as, my first half of my career, I spent in VC-backed startup land, a very different equation, right? You're building solutions, you're raising capital, you're getting those to market. Sid's grinning because I think that's the world that he's living in and enjoying right now.
Yep.
But when you make that shift and talking about this kind of the second half of my career, working inside of a highly regulated, enterprise-wide, very complex mosaic of different point solutions that are there, interfaces with internal and external data providers or functional providers, really your mind shifts and your focus shifts. Your focus shifts to how you're being a good steward for your client's experience end to end across all the functions of the offerings that you bring to market. You take a better look and a deeper look at change, right? So it's not about the as much change as you can get out there and as much horizontal and vertical growth, because in this type of scenario, you've already pretty much grown the extensive horizontal. You're going deep vertically, right? Adding more value to your offering. So how you approach those problems is slightly different. And then organizationally, right? From an organizational footprint, when you talk about the complexities of a data product versus a front office trading application versus a index service that people can be subscribed to, and how those play into a global services offering, you really also have to think about your organizational footprint maturity and how that then becomes more efficient over time and is globalized, right? Because we're dealing with 30 different jurisdictions all across the world, all these different nuances of how they need to operate across all currencies and all investment vehicles, both public and private as well.
So definitely sounds that we may get into kind of group therapy at this stage, having been a former CIO. I'm sure that's something that we probably have to engage in. But it's clear like State Street's been around quite some time, established financial services company with established brand. No disrespect, but as much as it trades and understands private debt, I'm sure it also has a lot of technical debt across your platform. So you're a CTO and you're looking to basically, let's just fast forward. One of the promises of a lot of the code generation solutions that have been out there in the market for the last couple of years has been able to unlock a lot of the technical debt that has basically been in these companies. Would you agree with that? Is that what you are seeing? Is that what you're looking to deploy into your environment, or is that too early for you right now?
No, you hit it spot on, Yusuf. And to be fair, being part of a 200-plus-year-old bank is not all slow and cumbersome as many say, right? Actually, State Street has been phenomenal in terms of their investment in modernization and embracing the innovation and emerging technologies out in the market. And historically, they've done that as well. It gives them a competitive edge. A key example inside of my organization right now is really focusing with emerging technology, specifically AI augmentation, in 3 different vectors. The first one, which is the one that's most mature and the one that I'm using really to modernize all that tech debt you just referenced, is using AI to augment how our developers build the products that we have, right? The second one is using AI to help us be better operators of that product. So things like application performance monitoring, infrastructure management, et cetera. And then the third, which is the one that's the kind of the slowest to mature for good reason, especially in this type of a regulated environment that is very sensitive to change because there's so much at stake, is using AI to augment the feature sets, actually embedding AI as a feature inside of the global offering, where we've been doing significant work. And we do have products in market today that uses LLMs as well as more legacy NLP and ML type technologies in that. But you're spot on. One of the things that excites me the most right now, Yusuf, is the ability to use kind of an AI-augmented SDLC to drive that modernization. Because otherwise, with this many systems, it's too hard, right?
I mean, the reality is like that has to be the future of where you want to go towards for a number of reasons. One is agility. I think cloud and the cloud platforms allowed you to be much more agile, to be able to sort of deploy, get product out there to market and be able to distribute. I think where we are now is the next level is to be able to embed AI in your SDLC and not just unlock a whole bunch of productivity, but also be able to care and take care of a lot of this technical debt that's been hanging around, understanding it, basically fixing it. I think that's definitely there in the engineering platforms. But I mean, to be respectful, I mean, the company has grown substantially over several years. So how have you looked to deploy out kind of agentic tools for even sort of internal processes, whether it's onboarding or even focusing on, say, engineering productivity?
It's a phenomenal question. And I think this hopefully gets all of us kind of talking about our collective experience in doing this. The way that my organization and the way that my teams are embracing this really is looking at AI augmented engineering in three parts, 3 areas. One is the one that probably most people are familiar with, which is copilots, right? So, IDE level embedded copilots to help our teams orient to a specific class or method in the code to help them, augment their ability to write that code more efficiently and effectively at a higher velocity. And also to get over things like the polyglot language barrier, right? In an organization this broad and this large, over 30 plus years of tenure just in the Charles River side, you have to understand that we've re-architected the platform at different phases of its tenure over and over again. You've got various different skill sets, seniority, subject matter expertise, and we're bringing in new talent all the time as we need to keep up with the pace of the industry, and that's really helping us. The second one is really where we're pioneering with kind of that whole agentic SDLC type of build. So this is like a refactor platform, the ability to take technical requirements, feed them into something that will then go through with that, identify all the dependencies, the documentation, get context, and then go and help you start to chink away at a 40 million line code base, right, in its entirety with all of that dependency. And then the last one is really then moving into the CLI space, right? So it's great that you can write it, but then how can you actually build and deploy it in a way that enables that pace of change?
You mentioned like a few very important points, right? Especially like as you get into the agentic SDLC, as you use the CLI tools and the copilots, right? But the key problem one of the key problems that you hinted at was like understanding the code base, right? And this is a problem shared by humans and the AI alone. As you mentioned, having a code base that has been around for a while, having teams and resources like switch over across code bases. So you don't have this one person who has all of the context of everything that's happened. So how do you think about solving that problem? I think we've worked together successfully on working on like documentation. Could you maybe talk about like the impact of that and how maybe that's like a compounding asset for the other tools as well?
Yeah, and I think there's if you take the aperture and you broaden it open, full wide, then you start to look at that tenure and how that's evolved over time, and you start to say, what's the difference between the scale of the team when you're sitting there with a couple of sprint teams, 10 to 20 developers, and everybody understands how everything works in the products that you're interacting with. It's not that big of a deal, right? You've got they know kind of how that's transformed over time, and everybody has that institutional knowledge. When you fast forward that across a few decades, and people have come and gone, and you've lost institutional knowledge, and you're still using services that were built by people that left 5-10 years ago, and has been multiple hands and handoffs through different teams. Now it's not just a copilot that can help. You're not just looking at a class or a method. You're not narrowing down that aperture to a finite area to understand what's happening there. You have to broaden it. And so you need to change the way that you evaluate that. And one thing that we've done collectively, Sid, together, is saying, how do I understand, based on the evolution of the tech documentation that we have spanning dozens of years,
right,
combined with the overall code itself, and bringing in the context of our product requirements documents to synthesize that and actually allow my 80 plus Scrum teams to work together on a refactor without just finding all of those dependencies along the journey, which is really why these things take so long. So being able to throw that in there, come out with a FRD that gets rid of a lot of the noise, right? Is this really the current state or not? Where are the dead code paths? Where are there true dependencies versus, ghost dependencies that really just don't exist anymore? And then allowing those teams to then refine that requirement document, feed it back in, and then accelerate that deployment. So then they can jump in there and close up the remaining 10 to 20% using copilots, using automated unit test case authorship, et cetera, at the end of that SDLC.
Let me just give a little bit of context here, and it relates to kind of mine and Ian's experience. So talked about level of complexity. Ian recently was looking to buy a gift, and we were trying to figure out all the tariff costs that typically go with that, and decided to sort of give that up. My complexity was going onto Amazon, looking to purchase a couple of items and try to figure out the most effective shipping. I know that sounds really intelligently and intellectually challenging, but you're basically dealing with component processes for millions of transactions which affect global markets. How in God's green earth do you look to try and do that by deploying out an AI solution into your SDLC when you know for a fact that if it goes wrong, this could affect a whole bunch of people's wealth? I mean, and I'm giving direct context of mine and Ian's experience because it tells about the level of scale and impact that you can basically have. So I guess my question is, what does a thought process go into when you select a solution that's going to impact a platform like that? And what is your approach to be able to make sure that it is successful?
Yeah, so I think we're teetering on the gloom and doom scared, Wait a minute, I don't
I'm
know what.
actually more, Jason, I'm not talking about doom and gloom. I'm just talking about your level of confidence and my level of absolute complexity on even basic issues. You're like dealing with like millions and billions of transactions. And me and Ian are like, hey, dude, like, can we get this thing shipped up?
I
Like,
just want to
the
ship
impact of
one
your work
feature.
is ship one. Yeah, we're like,
I was
shipping one
hoping to get
feature.
excited for you, Ian. I thought Yusuf was trying to ship you a vehicle, and they couldn't get through customs,
I'm just trying to send him a fidget spinner from last year, which I had left behind. But like you're dealing with like all different scales. So I think for the audience, on a serious basis, I think it's important for people to realize that when you deal at this level of scale, you have to have a thought process about being able to deploy technology, select the right vendors to be able to do it. How did you look to be able to combine that thought process? That's a serious aspect of the question.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a misnomer when I talk to my peers in the industry and our clients and those across different segments and even different industries. There's a bit of a misnomer or an expectation that when you're redoing your enterprise SDLC and you're introducing emerging technologies, that you're starting from the beginning and rebuilding it net new, and that's not actually true. We're building off the established foundation of decades of honing an enterprise delivery model that does give that assurance to the market, so that we can be mission critical software. And so it's important to note that we're not taking those tried and true controls and processes and procedures that we've used to build this industry and succeed in this industry. Instead, we're actually augmenting it with these solutions, right? So you actually, in my opinion, we're unlocking by adding this additional capabilities and additional assurance that improves quality exponentially more than we could have in the past. For example, yes, we're introducing agentic platforms to help us, accelerate and to do more in terms of our modernization, our tech debt reduction. But that agentic code augmentation still has to run through the same regression suites. It still has to go through code coverage and code quality automated checks before a PR can be issued and established, right? And what's really interesting, and Sid, I'd love to get your take on this too, is it unlocks things like, instead of me having, 2 senior developers doing a code review on a contribution for a PR before it gets into our, broader regression suites, I can actually have an agentic swarm check itself. I can have multiple agents doing the same code review and doing a level of depth that just we don't have the time to get to, or would be such a hindrance. We wouldn't be able to deliver anything to the market because of the time it would require. So ultimately, I feel like there's additional rigor now in that release chain because of the ability of adding these technologies onto it.
One thing there that I wanted to say real quick is like the classic Clayton Christensen definition of disruption, which I always love, which sort of people use disruption in a bunch of different ways now, but what it actually means is exponentially better than nothing. And like, that's what that is, right? It's like, what was actually going to happen is a 13% solution. And now it's going to be a swarm, I love that term, that's going to be doing stuff that you just couldn't have done to a level of specificity and depth that you couldn't have done, or you could have with, if you had unlimited
how many resources, how many people, how much time, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And like, that's what to me is just like so different and transformative. Is like, it really is just exponentially better than nothing. It's just the alternative is just, it just doesn't get done.
I think software, in general is unique and special. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing AI making its first and early marks in software, is that it is completely verifiable in most cases, right? So you can add verifiability from a standpoint of security, from the standpoint of coding standards. You can define rules at an org level that you can objectively verify and test software against. But the key aspect here is that unlike some other process, like I've worked in big tech for several years, the processes we followed for writing code and getting it into production are completely different from something like a financial services company like State Street would do, between like getting the code out and getting to production. I think what we've seen is that the agents and the tools are great at writing code, but it takes a lot more than that to get code into production. And I think the way like State Street and the other financial services are approaching it is they're looking at this as a speed multiplier, right? The work is defined, the criteria that the software needs to satisfy is defined, the tests haven't changed, the processes haven't changed. What's changed is the way you get the work done, right? At the speed at which you get the work done and who is involved in the process. So you still have the humans and you have the AI working with the humans. They're producing the work and it's still going through that tried and tested process, which gives you a measure of quality. Now, what's also changed is that the tools need to step up their game and add these additional layers, right? So for example, protection against adversarial prompting. It is incredibly hard. I think Jason hinted at this change management aspect. It is incredibly hard to train your entire team to use the tools effectively, right? Because you may end up using the wrong prompts, and then you need to ensure that you have the right guardrails to protect against the effects of that, erroneous prompt or that ended up in an adversarial change, right? So it is important both from the standpoint of the tools, which is something that we take very seriously in Blitzy, from a security standpoint, from a defensive coding standpoint, and from the standpoint of the processes, right? The processes need to evolve. We work with clients like State Street to ensure that they have the right guardrails so that such errors don't creep into production. So there's a lot of the work that you, to summarize, like the work that you have to do with like a typical company to integrate a tool, the change management and the tool level, that the solutioning part of it looks very different from financial services and the other more regulated industries that deal with this sensitive data and sensitive assets.
Yeah, Jason, I'm curious, something that Sid touched on, which kind of gets to the idea that like working, being a CTO in financial services is almost a different job than being a CTO somewhere else. Like, do you feel that? Does it feel that way? Is it a different job?
I mean, I think there's a responsibility, and I wouldn't say that it's any different than other industries. I mean, take a look at, supply chain, for example. I mean, if there's a disruption to the financial markets and there's material loss, that's catastrophic, right? But so is the inability to get shipping containers where they need to go on time to support the demands of a global supply chain. I think there's many industries out there that are what we call mission critical industries, and I think there's just it's a different level of rigor and of control and governance. Look, I like to say this to my clients who we kind of, this is more of a fireside commiseration kind of type of engagement, which is we're also highly regulated. We feel like we're working in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Like other than trying to build a nuclear reactor right now, we probably are the next in line in terms of being audited internally, audited externally, audited across every jurisdiction in terms of controls, policies, artifacts, how things work. And that's as an industry, right? And so, it's kind of that give and take, right? I like to say that innovation is what drives us, but innovation has a slightly different definition based on the industry and the mission criticality of what you're driving in terms of that impact. So to us, innovation means being able to innovate within the envelope of the expectation of the market and the impact of a misstep. Right. So cybersecurity also operates that way as well.
If I can interrupt, because I think it's important to say, you talked about compliance and you also talked about the fact that, look, if you compare that to supply chain, being able to make sure that containers stand on time, that all comes down to the question of how you are able to deal with incidents and being able to do that, having running a 24/7 operation. Where have you or are you using AI as part of stuff like incident response or, simple debugging? Would love to just kind of understand how you've looked at how to deploy that to the entire SDLC, including on incident response.
Yeah, so when we look at the operations side, expanding into, we run a SaaS offering. We use global clouds across multiple regions and availability zones across the globe all the time. I mean, we run trading markets open and close in all the different jurisdictions continuously, right? So being able to support that, we have, this goes to that kind of that second pillar, if we go back about the way we use AI to build our product, but we use AI to also operate our product. And that's where we're leveraging advancements in things like application performance monitoring, where we have global observability platforms and telemetry systems that are looking at every single transaction from the client on your desktop to the logic layers running in the servers inside of our infrastructure to all of the interfaces and integration points down to the database calls, whether they be relational or in our data warehousing, and tying those together. It's continuously looking for things like standard deviation deltas of long-running queries and methods, like why is this running long? Those have been kind of some of the tried and true areas where we've been able to scale our organization, because with that volume of transactions, it's very difficult to monitor them with just true legacy methodologies where you're just kind of, people are looking at a dashboard with X number of alerts, you've got all these false positives. How do you really sort through that at scale to identify where there's truly a problem preemptively before a client is calling you and saying, look, we have a trade delay, which can, has real recourse. The second area of that that we're really pushing is actually in the authorship of those signals. So using AI to help us author things like golden signals on monitoring that now we have the ability and the scale to not only run a kind of a general system, but now we can actually make client nuanced systems for their individual deployments, because we can monitor specific workflows now that one client might use in their investable landscape that might not be an instrument that another client uses. These solutions allow us to now monitor those specific workflows for that given client, which again allows us to be much more proactive versus reactionary from an operations standpoint.
Yeah, Jason, I think you described like a number of ways. I would like to go back to the part where you described the three categories of tools, and you've clearly tried and are working with them, on a regular basis. And you've not just used AI for the process of the creation part of the SDLC, but also from the runtime, live debugging, monitoring, operations side of the process. What do you think has been the most successful in terms of specific use cases that have worked really well for AI tools as in general? And where would you be more cautious in applying these tools in your process, given all of your constraints?
I think where we've seen the most traction, obviously, is the first segment that you talked about. The tools are changing rapidly, right? I mean, every day, we all know this, every single day there's something new. I mean, I was just listening yesterday, and Anthropic has acquired Bun, and now they're kind of creating this entire development ecosystem, which has everything from agentic coding to building, and that's great. But I think aside from pace of change, I think it makes sense to augment development. It makes sense to monitor large volumes of transactions across distributed traces from a monitoring perspective. Where I think we still are maybe a little bit immature, or still pioneering and really pushing hard on what I would say is kind of the holy grail that the industry expects. By the way, as a CTO or CIO, we all can probably appreciate the downward pressure we get from the business side, because the marketers are not stopping. They're saying everything is unlocked by AI. So the expectation then is that third pillar, which is what features are we adding to our collective products that is going to impact the industry, where what we're providing to our clients has augmentation with AI, it's adding real value. And so we've done a tremendous amount of investment in trying to bring that third pillar to meaningful value. And I think where we are at is there's a higher increasing demand of or level of confidence in things like explainer services for complex patterns, right? So let's take an example. I'm a wealth advisor, and I need to optimize a portfolio of investments for a family office or for a high net worth individual. And I run something called an optimizer. Now, those optimizers are extremely sophisticated and complex. They run across all these different rules that take into account all of these different variables, and they're tried and trusted and true for the industry. What they're not good at is explaining the results. Why? Why was the sentiment positive or negative? Why were the recommendations that came out the way that they were? And this is a really good use case for LLMs and for generative AI. And really, it comes down to how you prompt engineer that, how you expand context so that you can do it in a way. And what's interesting is it's not just throw these results into a context window and hope the LLM spits you back something else. It's really about curating and writing prompts as code so that you're standardizing those responses, which is what's the incredible part, right? You want to control as a product organization how that is consumed by the end user, how that wealth advisor is reading that. Is there a semantic, red light, green light, yellow light, and what artifacts are representing? How are you converting those responses to what an end user would expect as a visualization or as a common web interface, as example, and doing that at scale. And so that's where I think it works. Where we're struggling, and I don't know that we're there yet as an industry, is the actual recommendation side of that. You should make this trade or this trade, or you should advise and do that. And it's not just at the functional level, right? It's actually at the non-functional level too, where AI has traditionally struggled is I can get it to document, I can get it to refactor code bases because it's understood, all of the blueprints are there. But if I go in and say, build me a Kubernetes native service, understand all of my deployment mechanisms, my regulatory compliance, where I need HA or high availability and disaster recovery, and please incorporate all of my financial operations parameters so that you can optimize for performance, it'll respond. But the likelihood that it's going to fit into the topology and follow all of what came before it that we have currently deployed and work in that model is unlikely at this current state, right? So it's good as a pre-designed tool to give recommendations and hinges in that context versus just going in and saying, build the entire deployment and operations landscape for me.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there, Jason. I think we see a lot of like cool demos, right? When the new model comes out, like for example, Gemini 3 Pro, it's amazing at creating or replicating the Super Mario 3 game, right? But when it comes to working with code bases, and this is not just about Gemini, any LLM, even Opus 4.5, right? Where the LLMs start to struggle is where you're working with all these constraints, right? I want you to do this, I want to change this, I want to add this feature, but I want to do it while satisfying all of these 500 other requirements that I have. The LLM may see code that was written in a certain way that it does not like, that is not in its training data, but it was written that way for a specific reason. And you don't have the liberty to change that code just because you think this is a better approach, right? The LLM or the agent has to stick to the constraints and focus on the requirements and make very targeted and precise changes. And that is where today's AI struggles to a significant extent. That is a problem that we've been focused on solving, specifically. And that I believe we've had success doing. So a bit of a self-serving question. If you could talk about the kinds of success that we had in looking at the Agentic AI native SDLC, what would you recommend to other financial services organizations like State Street in terms of selecting use cases where Agentic SDLC solutions are effective and it's safe and useful to pursue those use cases?
I'll respond in kind of two segments to that. First, Sid, I think you highlighted something really interesting, which is the moonshot concept, right? Which is I'm going to just type in one prompt to rule them all, and I'm going to get something out the other end that's done, right? It's just done. And I think that's where, and everyone would love that, right? But then again, you're writing a novella or a novel in your prompt, trying to get everything actually accounted for. And that's where I really like what, for example, our partnership with Blitzy in their approach to this moonshot-esque problem, which is actually providing context iteratively through agents that work together and do iterative recursion on that over and over again so that you can bring in all of that context and build out a context that can then be referenced later and continuously as you refine. So it feels a little bit like, when we started engaging initial on in a POC we did in our compliance module, which is one of our core modules that Charles River started. Actually, as a matter of fact, the very first module Charles River started back in the 80s was compliance. So it's our oldest and longest running module and product offering, was to say, hey, here's 30 million line code base that has all these dependencies on pre-trade and post-trade and all these other services. We've got this one function that we really want to test this thing out on, which is called take to limit. It's a very simple function. It says, based on the compliance rules of this ecosystem, take me to the limit where I won't break them, right? Calculate out what is the optimal solution, take it to the limit. And when we first engaged, I was like, sure, I'm going to give you a 30 million line code base, and you're going to come back and tell me here's how you run take to limit feature, and it's done, right? And it's buildable. And so there was a lot of skepticism and we were very dubious. My team was very dubious, right? You're talking about a 20-year-old functionality here that has gone through so many iterations that not one person in the organization truly understands all of it. It's got to take a team of specialists to really get how everything works together today. And we were able to work through that. And what's nice is you work through it by, yes, giving it that broad-based context. And underneath the hood, it's building out, vector representations of all the inputs that it's getting. It's then allowing you to find, to hone down and get to a fine-grained understanding of, okay, I've got these 3 different requirements. They all say different things. Which one is actually reality? And you're able to go back and inject that into the system, and it's weighted and prioritized effectively. And out the other end, you get something that is buildable, which is quite impressive. But it's an iterative process to get there. And I think that's the important piece, which is a constant validation, revalidation as you're going through that process as a development team and as a product team, where you're working in, exhaustive product requirements and architectural designs to get to something that the developers can then take over and just do some fine tuning at the end to make sure that it's working into the ecosystem and can be well integrated.
Can I just ask a question about more on the human side? If you think about driving the transformation, a large part of that is the technology, partnering with companies like Blitzy, looking to basically have an AI strategy. But a large part of it is change management and being able to get people sort of in place. You've got people who've written COBOL for decades, and then they're working alongside Copilot. You've got new hires that you're sort of bringing to place. You have to then effectively communicate with an executive team to be able to bring them around. So I guess the question is, how do you think about bringing, your organization along with this kind of journey of having a much more agentic approach towards just the SDLC in the time ahead? Because this is a step change in terms of how they're going to be operating. Would love to just hear from, your kind of leadership perspective, how to be able to sort of drive that forward.
First of all, in my tenure, in my experience, I've never seen the demand so great and the transformation so rapid. It's an external and an internal pull, right? So if I look at, we've increased our global, I've opened up 3 engineering offices in the last year. We've massively grown our R&D investment and headcount. And all of, in that talent, even in that talent acquisition process, the first questions I'm getting, whether it's in quality engineering or in core product development from full stack developers, is, what's my AI-based tool chain that I get to operate in? What LLMs do I have access to? What CLI tools? How do you build? What's your infrastructure as code, landscape? Because you're now being measured as an organization, as an enterprise organization, based on, what developers like to do, solve problems. They don't want to be sitting in the DMV line, checking and ticking boxes, and if it's wrong, then they have to go back. They want to get that out of the way, and they want to operate by adding as much value as possible and get that scale. They want to be able to overcome those language boundaries, right? They don't want to be pigeonholed into a specialty of only being a React developer or only being a .NET developer or a Java developer. They want to be able to leverage their subject matter expertise that they've earned over years, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then get the net benefit of not having to go out and compete with new talent that's coming in that is up to speed on the newest tools, the newest languages, frameworks, et cetera. What we're seeing is a collapse of that. We're seeing that you get just really focused on smart people and leverage the subject matter expertise that you have in the business today, and then embracing it and incentivizing it. I know for us, we make it as informal across a couple of ways. One, we've introduced, leadership sponsored coffee hours and innovation hours across the firm, where I find the most impactful thing is not, here's the new features we're delivering to the market. Yes, that's great. We do our client conferences. We do our marketing of how our roadmap's evolving. But what's really impactful is getting a room of developers and product people into the room and having a junior developer walk through how they found something that has existed for 10 years undetected and solved it in a matter of an hour. Having a team lead come in and say, this is a complex function that I had no idea what was going on, and what would have taken 4 weeks, I was able to come in and instantly orient to what this was doing so that I could give my best practices to my team and they could solve it 400 times quicker than they could do before. Those stories are really what's meaningful and impactful. And so I believe in kind of the federation model, not centralize your innovation, emerging technology, and AI in a kind of a central group that's kind of like seen as this ivory tower of really smart people. Instead, it's actually empowering and flattening the organization and allowing the individuals with hands on keyboards that are using this every day to evangelize it, right? And to build that up. And that then organically your best practices are going to evolve. Creating those repos, sharing those best practices, referencing those best practices will uplift your entire organization.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Just to comment on that, I think that approach really makes a lot of sense for me from a technical standpoint, right? Because I'm still closer to the engineering side. I still write code on a day-to-day basis. As an engineer, what really matters is the ability to have flexibility, right? To be able to, use a vast array of tools and to make, meaningful contributions. Like, for example, you can pair, let's say, just for the sake of it, take an Agentic SDLC tool like Blitzy. You can pair that like you guys do with the Copilot. You can have a CLI tool that scans the code base. And to be absolutely honest, no one has 100% figured out what the best version of the
Agreed.
Agentic SDLC looks like, right? We're still
Agreed.
in the space where enterprises are using a vast array of tools, and both the tools and the enterprises are evolving very quickly. The enterprises from the standpoint of the change management that they're able to execute, and the tools from the standpoint of the features that they're able to support, right? And there's still a lot of overlap between many of the tools, but that's fine. I think the advantage that organizations like State Street and others that have been around for a while have is that they have the liberty to select multiple tools, integrate them to their software development lifecycle, work through sprints, features, cycles, identify what works best, and then build a solution that creates the best effect on productivity, right? So it's important for the tools to demonstrate how they're impacting productivity, how they're moving the needle on KPIs and metrics, in keeping the code quality high, in keeping it secure, in being an integral part of the team. From the enterprise's standpoint, I think as a tool provider, as a vendor, we appreciate them being open to the entire change management process that it takes to really be successful on this. And I think it's been a delight working with State Street on that front. So Jason, I would like to make a reference to the client advisory board meeting that State Street had, where you brought us in, and I thank you for that opportunity where we could talk about the success that we had together, in multiple use cases across State Street. And when you recommended to the clients that, they could use tools like Blitzy to meaningfully impact the SDLC and, achieve productivity gains. Could you talk about your specific recommendations on that front and how you would advise, folks in similar businesses, financial services companies as State Street to adopt tools, in the agentic SDLC space like Blitzy?
Yeah, so I think one fundamental and important thing, if I was talking to my peers, right? So if I'm talking to my peers at other financial institutions is, and I think most of them know this, and most of them are investing here, is you have to invest in the non-attractive parts first. And what I mean by that is you have to build a foundation that's going to support being able to bring on solutions and tools that could change your overall enterprise SDLC, like Blitzy, or like a GitHub Copilot, or a Claude Code, or whatever it might be. And that's a lot of work, and that's a major investment. So I think there's a maturity level that's a prerequisite in order to make this successful. So if you look at what we've done, we have created a fabric of policy, tools, and behind the scenes products that we don't even sell to our clients. Like, these are internal capabilities, things like our responsible AI framework. So everything that comes in and goes out, no matter what vendor we use, no matter what endpoint we hit, passes through the responsible AI gateway. And that allows us globally and collectively to enforce an assurance to the market that when you engage with us, you are not sacrificing risk for innovation. And so having that investment up front and making sure that your organization is prepared to take advantage of these capabilities. And that's not just in tools, that's also in leadership styles, that's also a culture shift, right? I spent a large number of months simply working with my teams, my team leads, individual developers, just giving them confidence in how to use these tools, how this change is going to work. What is your role in this once we've embraced the target state SDLC? And what to my surprise, at first we got a lot of what you would expect. You know, am I going to be out of a job? Or is engineering not going to be a role anymore? Like this thing can't write as good of code as me. I'm never going to embrace it, because they looked at it as a competing entity instead of as the ability to really force multiply themselves. And once they got into the details of what that would look like, and we went through some POCs at different levels of this, and then we started rolling it out and measuring adoption and getting into the fine grain of, you know, what was actually, you know, generated versus what was actually in, and teams seeing the quality uplift and teams seeing their acceleration. We ended up with groundswell, and that groundswell then helped the rest of the organization then make additional investments in the broader frameworks. And now we feel like we're in a really good position to have a competitive advantage on embracing industry-changing technologies like Blitzy, so that we can now actually realize some of that target state that we couldn't before. This organization, you can't just go out to the market and say, oh, somebody popped up with a seed round or an A round investment, and we're going to bring you in and roll you out to $60 trillion portfolio of product offering. It's just not going to happen, right? There's got to be a rigor, and there has to be that institutionalization of a framework in place before you can do that. So that would be my guidance that I would say to organizations wanting to embrace this, is really gut checking where you're at on that journey and making sure that you have that good foundation built so that you can keep up with the pace of change and you can really leverage the best of the best that's out there.
That's fantastic.
Well, final question here. It's CIO classified after all, so we need one secret. Jason, you got a secret for us that you know as a CTO that maybe your peers don't know?
So I don't know if it's necessarily a secret. I feel like it's a pain that a lot of people are feeling that are in my role and in other industries and in other organizations, even within financial services and financial technology, fintech. And I'll keep it with AI as the theme, since that's what we're kind of talking about here today. What I've seen a lot of, and we're guilty of this as well, is a propensity to go and create the centralized AI authority at the business, right? And what that yields is you build up a fantastic group of talent, right? And really smart people that are pioneers and innovators and entrepreneurs. You bring them into the organization, and what you do is you effectively create an amazing POC factory. What you do is you're turning out this really incredible public-facing material that you're convincing everybody, look at what the art of the possible is. And then what happens is they take that and they hand it off to the BAU organization that actually runs the business, right? So these are all the tech teams, these are all the product teams that are actually operating at scale these industries. And they say, here you go, look, we proved that it could work as a POC with a limited number of use cases. Now please go operate this at scale for the industry. And what you don't have now is you have this giant isolation chamber where you have your organization is not prepared to, and it's not federated, so they can't take on that great work that's been done by the POC factory, and they move on, right? They're doing the next best use case, and then you're kind of left saying, okay, now how am I going to do this in a way that's going to get the most value, and how am I going to be able to maintain it, operate it at scale, give assurance to it, and then more importantly, continuously improve it, right? As you're building products, you know that there is a continued investment in that. And so that's probably the one thing that I would say that we are now transforming to make sure that the investment is actually at the individual technology teams, by the functional builder, by the product line, to say, no, there is an AI cohort focus globally across every part of the business, and not just kind of just one central center of excellence that's just going to kind of tell everybody what to do and what not to do.
Jason, wonderful having you on the show. Sid, thanks so much for joining. This was awesome. We will be following along on the journey for State Street. Jason, any final thoughts? Anything to plug?
Not really anything specifically to plug other than I appreciate the opportunity, Ian and Sid. As always, pleasure to connect and spend some time together. The last thing I would plug is we're all in this together, right? Technology leaders, the industry is evolving at a pace that's never been evolved before. But I err everybody to stay optimistic because I think there's some just incredible things happening that we're just beginning to see. And I think it's going to make the collective experience of technology teams globally, no matter what industry you're in, more manageable, more effective, and we get to solve problems, which I think is what motivates all of us.
Amazing. Could not agree more. And I have one thing to plug. Everybody go check out Blitzy, the enterprise autonomous software development platform with infinite code context. Go to blitzy.com, book a demo, go talk to Sid. They're the best. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. Take care.